So I'd like to speak today about one of the strongest questions in all of Hashkafa, in all of Jewish philosophy. It's a question, really, it's a question on the meaning of Nam D'Ksufa. And there's a very big problem. What is the issue with Nam D'Ksufa called bread of shame? The issue with this thing is that one of the most important questions of all in the entire Torah is simply the question, why did God require that man should do mitzvos or do a certain avoda so that he can earn Olam Haba? Why couldn't God give him the situation of the future eternal world by itself without doing anything? Because first of all, that's the nature of God. God is an absolute giver. He has nothing to do with the action of taking. So the question is, why does God ask a person to return to him a specific activity or action so that it's considered as if he earned his existence in the world to come? We all know that the world to come, Olam Haba, is an eternal world, beyond time. There's no past, present, or future in Olam Haba. It's beyond space. Person is actually not located in a certain space. In other words, it's really a world that exists eternally. So if God wanted to give this kind of existence, which is a coexistence with God, God actually created man to give him the ability to coexist with God without time. In other words, beyond time or forever. So this is something that God would give as an eternal gift. God does not give anything and require anything in return. But yet we see that God created Olam Hazeh, this world, in time and space and substance, so that man could choose to do actions which have to do with the mitzvahs. So fundamentally, the question is, why did he do it? So the answer is the answer that the Ramchal gives, and basically everyone gives, is because the nature of a person is in a very high place. And what his desire is that for him to receive something, he has to in some way contribute or manufacture that gift. His efforts must be involved in some way in terms of acquiring the gift that God wants to give him. And the reason is because without that, without him contributing to the actual effort itself, he feels a certain sense of disempowerment called kisufa or shame, but he feels a certain sense of disempowerment when he receives that gift. So the only way to remove this sense of disempowerment, as if he feels that he doesn't deserve it and so on, is to make him do something for it, and to earn it, to earn the gift as not as a gift, but as a reward for doing something. And what he has to do is therefore earn it in performing the mitzvahs of the Torah. And what exactly does he have to perform? Well, God gives the human being, the Zulasoi, commandments that he has to follow, and by following these commandments, he performs the will of God. Why does he have to perform these commandments? Well, fundamentally, these commandments, what are called mitzvahs in the Torah, are founded on a certain basic principle. Because fundamentally, the way God sees it is that the coexistence with God in eternity is actually a reward for him doing something, in the sense that he develops a relationship with God. In other words, his residence in the situation called eternity is actually a relationship with God himself. And in that relationship, it has to be a correct relationship. What does this mean? Is that he has to understand who God is and the fundamental principle of who God is and so on. He has to know who he's relating to. And who is that? Who is he relating to? He's relating to the creator of all existence, the master of all creation, God. And what does he have to know about him? So what he has to know about God, who he will develop a relationship with, is exactly who God is. And God says very simple, who I am. It says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is one. What does this mean? So the Torah, when it describes God, only really says one compliment about God. It doesn't say really much else, although it says that, he's a creator, he creates existence and so on. But the one thing that God wants man to know is the title is the sentence, Ein od mevado, that there is no one else. And what does that mean, that there is no one else? Well, it means, first of all, that there's no other God. He is the only God who's responsible for existence itself. That's number one. Number two, he wants people to know that there's no possibility of being another God. Not only there's no actuality that there is such a God, the God, but that there's not possible for there to be another God. So therefore, God is an absolute unity where there is nothing else at all in any sense like him. But there's a third concept which is very important. What God wants him to know is what? Is that not only he does not have another possible being with him, but he has actually no outside. Ein od mevado, there is nothing else. That's the statement. There is nothing else besides God. So what this seems to imply is that God himself has no outside. Because if he had an outside, there would be the possibility of there being another God. But since he has no outside exists at all. So everything which can exist is God. God is existence, and existence is God. So there is nothing else but him. And this is the basic thing that God wants man to know. That what? That there's nothing else at all in existence except for God, who's a total existence himself. And God wants to share existence, we can say in a certain way, with man, but he needs man to know exactly the nature of God, which means that there's nothing else, there's no outside with God. And once he acquires this information, or rather chooses this truth, then man is qualified to have a situation where he's eternal. So therefore God wants him to be able to choose this, and the way man chooses this idea is by man choosing the difference between two ideas. One, that there's an idea that there is a God, and two, that there is nothing else but God. And how does man demonstrate this choice? That's the question. So the answer to that is that he performs certain commandments which are given to him by God to demonstrate or indicate that he believes this to be true. And what is he demonstrating? There is no one else but God. And so therefore, God gives him certain commandments that restrict his ability in the physical world. In other words, there are certain physical impulses which man is told not to indulge in. And that if he follows this edict, if he does not indulge in certain activities, and these are mitzvahs, for example, if he eats kosher food or if he keeps the Sabbath. So if he performs some of these activities in the physical universe, the man is indicating that he believes that God commanded these things, this is the Torah, and that there's no other way, there's no other possibility. So fundamentally what he's saying when he does the commandments is that there's no one else. There's only God and there's him and there's no one else. But what he's really saying is something even more than that. He's saying fundamentally a certain choice, which we will speak about in a minute. So this is the fundamental concept that the man indicates by the performance of certain deeds which restrict in a certain way what a man can do in the physical universe and what he cannot do in the physical universe. This is a declaration to God that he is the only one and so on, and therefore his relationship with God is absolutely a singular relationship. Now, many years ago, I had a certain question which I pondered and which I thought was an interesting question many, many years ago. And that question was a very simple thing. What I asked is, let's say you had a conversation with God. And you said to God himself, what does it feel like to be God? Well, that's a very strange question, of course. But the answer is, what does it really feel like to be you? What does it feel like to be God? In other words, that you have no origin and you have no termination. You never begin and you never end. And that there is nothing like you at all in existence. Such that you don't even have an outside. What does it feel like to be this being? So what God says to him, I have a very interesting feeling. If I would have a feeling, which I don't have in any sense like you think, but if I would have such a feeling, I would actually have a certain sense of joy that would come from my being. Why? Because Eino Mulvadi, there's nothing else but me. And therefore, I am completely independent of everyone, of everything, any force, because I don't need anything to complete my existence. I am totally complete and I am whole, and I don't need anyone or anything to complete what I am. So in other words, the statement is not that I exist. I don't exist in the normal way, but I am existence itself. And it's impossible to understand that I am identical with existence, and so on. So what God says, if it's through my independence that I experience myself, I have self-awareness, and I experience myself, of course, and therefore I am, but in such a way as that I am actually my own existence. I don't possess existence as something outside of me, but I am existence itself. You cannot understand it. That's impossible for anyone to understand it. But the notion that I am existence itself and therefore I am perfect is such a complete feeling, such a perfection, that in a certain sense, if I could feel pleasure, which I really don't in the sense that I can feel something outside of me, I would feel incredible joy. And this, in a way, is what I answer to you, that I don't experience actual pleasure in any sense, of course, but I experience this concept from my own being. In other words, what God says to us is the following. How does a person experience pleasure? Where does the pleasure come from? Well, the first way it can come from is from sensory registrations. In other words, your sense organs, your eyes, your ears, the ears in terms of hearing, in terms of smelling, touching, and so on and so forth, and tasting, all of these organs, these 5 different organs, give you a certain sense of pleasure. But they record a certain pleasure as a response to certain impulses which are given to the sensory organs. So you fundamentally feel pleasure through your sensory organs. There's an additional way you can feel pleasure. You can feel pleasure from your achievements. When you accomplish something, when you do something, you can also experience a certain great satisfaction and even a sense of joy. So this is 2 ways that you can experience a certain pleasure. But finally, there's a 3rd way, which is closest to the way I feel it. I feel a certain sense of joy from my very being itself. In other words, I don't have an organ, and it's not a question of I have any achievements which I feel joy about, because there's nothing else besides me, but I can feel the depth of who I am, and so on. So I have what's called an itself, the ultimate itself. In other words, I am a core being which is real and true. And from the enormity of this particular type of being, I feel a profound joy. And that's only something that you can understand. That's not really true in a certain sense. But if anything, my joy doesn't come from my senses. It doesn't come from my achievements. Where does it come from? It comes from the nature of my being itself. So this is what God says. Well, if this is what he says, so then we can answer now a very deep question. The question is the following. The problem of Nam D'Ksufa. If we say that a man cannot receive a gift which he has not earned, in other words, if he receives such a gift which he has not earned, so there's a certain sense of disempowerment. And if that's true, and that's why God gave him the commandments to keep and a certain task that he has to do, why did God do that? In other words, God is the one who gave him a feeling of disempowerment itself. So therefore, it doesn't make sense. God gives man a problem called Nam D'Ksufa, which means dread of shame. It's a fundamental feeling of disempowerment if he receives something that he hasn't earned. Well, God gave this feeling to man based on this concept. So therefore now God has to give the solution to this. Now that you have the problem called disempowerment or Nam D'Ksufa, now you have to eliminate the problem. Well, that seems to be a circular kind of a situation. In other words, it's because God gave a person the sense of what? Of this frustration or disempowerment, so that's why God has to now give him a certain way around it. Well, the best way around it is not to give him the situation of disempowerment in the first place. So why is this done? Why does God give you a certain problem with your ability to receive eternity and then give you a solution to the problem? Why doesn't he simply eliminate the problem itself where there's no sense of disempowerment? This is a fundamental problem. In fact, it is the most powerful problem because it really has to do with why God gave the commandments. And he gave the commandments because he gave the physical universe. So why did God create the physical universe and have to give us the commandments to eliminate a problem which he himself created? So there's no answer given that I have seen in the Kol Ator Kula. Nowhere is this question asked and nowhere is it answered. The Ramchal says, and Rabbi Chaim Lutzato says, that the answer to this question is unknown. We do not know the reason why he gave this. We do not know the reason why God gave us the problem to begin with and why he has to take it away only through our own efforts. There's no clear answer to this at all. But I would like to offer the possibility of an answer. That's right. There's a possible way to answer the question which clearly explains why God gave the problem, and therefore why God has to give the possibility of removing this problem. It has to do with the nature of Olam Haba itself. What exactly is Olam Haba? What is the joy that we feel in Olam Haba? Well, fundamentally, the basic concept is the nature of pleasure. Olam Haba is a situation in which mankind develops a sense of profound joy and ecstasy. But how does he have this? How does he get this in Olam Haba? Does he get it from a certain sensory organ? No. Maybe Olam Haba is about a sense of achievement that he gets. He gets a certain joy because of a certain achievement. Is that what it's about? No. So therefore, if we don't get this pleasure at all from sensory organs, and if we don't get this pleasure from achievements, where do we get it from? So this is the answer. The answer is God wants us to get it from our core, from who we are, from our very nature. He does not want us to acquire it in some way through achievements or efforts. He does not want it to be given because of some organ of some sort. But God wants it to come from our very being itself. And it has nothing to do with what we do and so on. It comes from our being. But how can God do this? How can something which He possesses, He possesses this great joy and so on, because He is God. How can we duplicate that? How can we rather duplicate or even replicate that and so on? So therefore, this is the fundamental answer to what it is. He gives us a gift which is profound, extraordinary, which He does not give to anything in creation. What is that? He gives us the gift of, in a certain way, kind of replicating who He is. In other words, He gives us an ability, in a certain sense, to become a mini-God. He gives us a certain possibility of a divine force, where in a certain way we become a replicated God. That's right. We actually can acquire a kind of a quasi-divine personality or nature. And from that nature, we can begin to derive a pleasure, a sense of eternal pleasure and joy from not anything else but ourselves. We can actually derive a pleasure from who we are and so on. Well, how can God do this? How can He make us into a replicated divine being? Nothing else in creation is given this ability. The only one that's given this ability is man. And how is he given ability? Well, we have to examine exactly what God gave man. Man is a being, an entity of self-awareness. What does that mean? Man is not simply an entity that lives. Life is one thing. Life allows action and allows existence. But life itself fundamentally is more than that for man, because a man has something called self-awareness. What does that mean? In other words, a person, the Zulosoi, knows that he is. He is aware of himself. He is conscious of himself. So man is not only alive as a being, but he's conscious of the fact that he is alive as a being. That concept is called self-awareness. In other words, mankind has what's called a self, S-E-L-F. What is the self? Well, we don't clearly know what it is, because the self is the aspect of consciousness. It's the very consciousness of a man. It's the very awareness of a person of himself. In other words, the truth is, there's no such thing as existence. I know this is a shocking thing, but there's no such thing as the process of existence, where existence is some kind of a process. So therefore, how does something exist? How does a person exist? The answer is, he exists through his awareness of himself. That's right. The self is an act of self-awareness, and he knows that he is. And that's his existence. That is existence. You see it. So therefore, mankind is given the ability to know that he is. And since he's given that ability to know that he is, he actually acquires or possesses his own existence. That's right. His existence is part of, in a sense, it's like a backpack. It's part of his being. He not only exists as a being, he knows that he exists as a being, and therefore he has knowledge of himself, and that's existence. But how does he acquire knowledge of himself? Well, this is a very important thing. What God gives him is the ability to have free will. What's that mean, free will? Who's he free of? So the answer is he's free in a certain sense of God himself. In other words, God says, I'm going to give you the ability to make a choice. But that ability to make a choice between two options is an ability that will only come from you. It will not be influenced by me at all. So God, in a certain sense, puts man outside of himself. Now, does he truly put man outside of himself? Because this is impossible. There can be nothing outside of God. But in a certain sense, he does. He doesn't actually put a man outside of his being. God doesn't do that. But what he does do is he gives man the ability to know that, and to know that as a choice. Because man suddenly, through his free will, has a double choice. What's the choice? Well, man can either see himself as outside of God. So therefore what he sees is a duality, me and God. And that translates itself in terms of me, you. Man refers to himself as a me, and he refers to God as a you. So there's a clear duality. What makes him see that duality? Well, his self-awareness. The self-awareness of a person actually creates a situation where he sees God as outside of him. And he refers to that being who's outside of him as God. Now, is God really outside of a person? No, because the person is really inside God. God is the foundation for everything that is. So therefore, the person is not, God is not outside of him. In a certain sense, God is inside of them. In other words, God is like the inner me. He is the essence of self-awareness. How he is that, we have no idea. We do not understand, but we do understand something. How did he create man? He did not create man from nothing. That's what it said, but that's not really true. Man is created, in a certain sense, from God. In some way, God created man and created the concept of a man, but in a certain way, he takes from himself the concept of self-awareness and he gives it to man. That's right. You cannot really create self-awareness. It either is or isn't. So therefore, what God does is he doesn't create self-awareness from nothing, but he kind of, in a certain sense, derives a sense of self-awareness from his own self-awareness. In other words, in a certain way, we come from God. But we do not come from nothing. We weren't created from no existence. We were created with a certain sense of self-awareness from his self-awareness. How that works, we cannot understand or cannot know. That is beyond comprehension. But this is what God says to her. What is the relationship that you and I have? You think it's a relationship of me, you, where there's a duality, but it's not true. The relationship we have is really inner me, which as I am inside you, I am your foundation, and you. But you're not outside of me, you're inside of me. What this means, we cannot comprehend. But it simply means that we are not created from God, but we are created in God. So in a certain sense, we are derived from God. Creation implies something from nothing. But that's not how God made us. God didn't make us nothing because he doesn't give us the sense of self. He does not create the sense of self. But in a certain sense, he exposes his sense of self through man. And suddenly man knows himself. So we are said to be derived from God. So the equation is not me, you, which a person seems to see when he observes God or he knows God, but rather inner me, me. That I am a kind of, God is fundamentally like my foundation, and in some way shares the concept of me, to share it with the human being. So in a certain sense, this is incredible. Why? Because when man chooses by his free will, in a certain sense, he actually develops a certain independence. That's right, mankind develops a certain independence of God. What is the main attribute of God? His independence. What does independence mean? Independence means that he is completely outside of anything. In other words, he has no outside himself. So everything is inside of God. And this applies to man also. In a certain way, your self-awareness comes from his self-awareness. How is that possible? We have no idea. But it's not that we become God himself. We cannot. Because we still have an outside. And the outside appears to be God. But he's not really outside of us. He is our foundation. So therefore, by doing the commandments, we actually develop a certain independence from God. That's right. You see, what God is doing is a profound concept which is really not clearly understood. What it means, God says to us, I'm going to make you to a certain extent like me. And to the extent that you know yourself as a part of me, you will feel about yourself as if you were outside of me. You will have the illusion that you are outside of me, even though in reality you are not outside of me. But you're the one who actually has to decide that truth. In other words, you have a choice. Your choice is between two options. One option is what? Is that you're outside of me and I'm outside of you. That's the formula of me, you. But the real truth of that is that you're not outside of me. You're kind of inside me. So the real truth of the two of us, our real relationship is you are kind of inside me in that way. And I derive you from myself. But you see, that option is based on your choice. In other words, even though there's a reality, and the reality is that I'm not outside of you, I'm kind of inside of you, that's the reality. But you see it in two ways. Because you have possessed self-awareness, it looks like you see me outside, but it's not true. But I'm giving you a choice to either know the truth or not to know the truth. So I'm giving you a choice which is free of me. In other words, in certain ways, it appears to be outside of me. So in initiating that free will and making the choice that you are inside of me, you're actually creating a certain sense of being that never knew this before. And by creating this sense of being, you are creating yourself. You are choosing your nature itself. No one else is doing this for you. You are determining what your relationship is with me, how you come from me. And when you understand that you come from me in a certain derived way, you will suddenly understand our real relationship. And if you see me as something outside of you, separate from you, you will understand a false relationship. And I want you to get the real relationship. In other words, I want to do this in two qualities. There's two qualities to this choice. One, that you make the right choice, that I'm not outside of you and you're not outside of me, except that you are derived from me. And I want you to realize this truth. But number two, I want you to realize this truth by what? By yourself, by your being alone, which seems to appear to be independent of me. So when you make the choice, the correct choice of who I am in relationship to yourself, you will be creating yourself for the first time. You see, that's in a certain way how God makes us, gives us the power of creation. God gives us a semblance of creation. He allows us to create ourselves because he allows us to see the truth based on our own free will, by ourselves, not through him. So therefore, in a certain sense, we actually establish a kind of outside. We are not outside of God, but we kind of establish a spirit of that as if we're outside of God. So therefore, we create a certain quality that never existed before. What is that quality? We create the inner self, or the itself, what I call itself, ITSELF. How do you create an itself? Well, you create a certain view that you believe suddenly is true, and because you've now established it by free choice, you will have actually created something which never really existed before. Because before you had the duality of options. You had two options, to think of God one way and to think of him another. Now you, by that choice, create the actual option of the truth. So since this truth didn't exist before in your consciousness, and now it exists, I call that part of your consciousness the itself, which is new, which is developed suddenly by you, that didn't exist before. So in creating that sense of itself, which is new and is the correct version of what I am to you, you will have created yourself anew. In a certain sense, you have become independent, like me, but not as I am the independent. I am totally independent, and I need nobody, nothing to complete me. You need, however, you need me to complete yourself. But the idea, the truth of that will be totally new to you. So you will have created a certain direction of yourself. You see, even though I have given you the quality of self-awareness, that's the quality that I give you. But you will develop the direction of that. Where does that self-awareness go? What does that self-awareness say about yourself and me? You will determine that, and not me. So therefore, by determining it yourself, you create a certain sense of independence. That's right. And since you develop that sense of independence by yourself, you will attain a tremendous stature, and that stature is to be a quasi-divine being. So therefore, in effect, I will have given you, to some degree, slightly, my quality itself. I will give you the ability to create something that was not there before. And in creating something that was not there before, and creating something which is yourself, it's the direction of your consciousness. Even though I have given you the consciousness that you possess, but the direction of that consciousness will be your creation. So in a certain sense, I have made you a mini God. Now, why have I done this? Because as a mini God, you realize that you have a certain quality which is somewhat like me, and that's independence. And therefore, in a certain sense, you will become a divine figure. That's right. You are not divine like me, where you have no outside, but you are divine like me, in the sense that by determining the direction of where your consciousness goes, you will have created the direction of your consciousness. And that's what you've done. And therefore, this being, which is called in itself, will be your creation. In other words, you will have, to some degree, created your own being. That's right. Because even though you have not created your sense of consciousness, you will have created the direction of your consciousness. And this will be your creation. And to say that I've given you the ability to have your creation means in some way I have blessed you with the power to be independent of me, in a way. Not truly, but to some degree, by determining your own direction of your consciousness, by realizing that you are inside of me, and that's the truth of us, you will have created that thought in your consciousness and the content of the consciousness. So on a certain level, you have acquired what? The consciousness of the divine. Now, why have I done this? Well, I've done this because this, in a way, makes you like God. And I want you to have the pleasure or the hanor of Olam Haba coming from your being. You see, it comes from your being because you created it. Your being didn't exist truly before. It existed as an option, as two options. But now your being will exist in a new way by a truth. You will be wedded or merged with a certain truth, the truth of what you and I are together. And before, when I created you, you didn't have that truth. You were unsure. What is it? Is our relationship a me-you a duality, or is it an enemy-me duality? You will have created the direction of where your consciousness goes. And in that sense, you will partake of a divine nature called independence or quasi-independence. Now, why is that? Because what I want you to have is a certain hanor, or a certain tremendous joy. And this joy is connected to the sudden appearance of yourself. You will have created yourself, not the actuality of yourself, the reality of it, but you will have created the possibility of that, the existence of it itself, which has never existed before. And this joy that you will possess in Olam Haba in eternity, when we are finally together, will come from you. It will come. It will come from your choice. And that's the greatest joy that you can have. The joy is not coming from a sensory organ, something outside of you. It's not coming from an achievement. In other words, you're not feeling joy because you've achieved something. That's not what it is. You are achieving joy, wow, in a sense, because of what you have become, what you are, your existence. Your existence, which is newly formed and which completely comes from you, the direction of your existence is yours. And therefore you will have a joy which comes from being, not a joy that comes from a sensory organ or a joy that comes from an achievement. This has nothing to do with achievement. You see, this is the mistake that everyone makes. Everyone thinks that you have to create something in order to enjoy it. That's not what it is. It's not what you create. It's that you create. That since you have the ability to make something which never existed before, that's what makes you divine. That's right. That's what allows you to replicate. And because suddenly you touched upon a divine quality, that will become the origin or the source of your joy. Your joy is coming from you, yourself, from the itself that you created, which is the direction of your consciousness. So therefore, I'm not giving you something that tells you have to manufacture it. No, it's not that you have to manufacture your Olam Haba. You have to become like me. The purpose of the physical world and the world that I created is to give you an opportunity to become quasi-divine. In the physical universe, you don't realize that's your effort is suddenly in obtaining a quality to some degree like God himself. And that's what Olam Haba is. Olam Haba, the eternal world, is an incredible creation. Only man can create it because man only has free will. And the fact that he creates it alone gives him a certain quality of independence, which is a divine quality. And therefore man will share this quality in a certain sense with God by making the right choice and creating a direction for his consciousness. And in so doing, man will become a quasi-divine or a replicated divine being. So therefore, I'm not healing the problem that I gave you. I did not give you a sense of shame because you're getting something which you didn't produce. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with I gave you. But what I'm doing is I'm giving you the ability to have joy from your being by allowing you to create something, and therefore giving you the quality to, in a certain sense, of a replicated divine being. I am making you into a mini God. So therefore, I'm not solving a problem that you are embarrassed to taste something which you didn't produce. This has nothing to do with it. But you are becoming a godlike figure because suddenly you're exhibiting a certain talent which is to some degree outside of me. It's not really outside of me, but in a certain sense, part of it is in a certain way. So the physical universe provides you with the opportunity to go from a created being, which has nothing to do with divine creation, and to become your own creation, that your sense of core, which is called the itself, your sense of yourself, which is your consciousness, is created by you and not me. So therefore, that's the answer to the question. God is not simply solving a problem which he created, because this is somewhat unnecessary. This is completely unnecessary. But he's granting you how you can have joy from your very being itself, just like God possesses joy from his very being itself. But of course, God enjoys true joy. Why? Because God is truly independent with no outside. You are not. You are dependent totally on God. That's the truth. But your conception of it, your ability to believe that, your acceptance of that as the ultimate truth is your creation. So in terms of that choice that you make by yourself, you have suddenly adopted the quality of independence which God has. And this is the answer to the question, why does God solve your problem or heal your problem when he created the problem in the first place? God did not create the problem in the first place. The problem existed. How can you replicate the situation of being somewhat divine for eternity? And the answer is by, in the physical universe, being able to mimic what God does, and where you create your own independence in a certain sense, and you become a mini God. That's what's actually going on. So therefore, we see something very powerful, and it's very hard to believe. What is Olam Haba? What is the eternal world? What does it look like? Well, Olam Haba is really not a place. It's not a place. It's a situation. It's a situation where you establish a certain quality similar to God. Of course, it's not like God, but it's similar to him, and you become a mini divine being. That's right. Before you did any mitzvahs, you were not a mini divine being. You determined, but now you are, because now you have determined the direction of your consciousness, and in that sense, you have become an example of an independent being similar to God. But of course, you're not like God. You're not truly independent. But in the choice that you made, you are independent, and therefore you have become a God-like being. And this is the answer to the question, probably one of the greatest questions of all time. I believe that this is an answer. So therefore, Olam Haba is the situation in which you have completely redefined yourself. You have completely positioned yourself. Before, you had nothing of a divine quality except a certain self-awareness. But then being put in a physical sense and having to choose the mitzvahs, commandments of God, and therefore having created your relationship with God, you actually create something from nothing. And that is the power of God, to create something from nothing, which you create. Because you create that sense of being that only he possesses. But now you also can possess it because you've created something from new. And in that case, by giving yourself the quality of independence, something that you can do outside of everything else, you have created the closest thing to God himself. So if God wanted to create, in a certain sense, the greatest figure or the greatest entity that he could create, something which is almost like himself, who is that? Well, that is you. You are that being. Because only you have the possibility of becoming something like God. How? Because you have created something which didn't exist, and you have created something by yourself. And what have you created? The itself, the core choice of the truth in what you are invested in. So therefore, if God wanted to make another God, of course he can't do it, because God has no outside. But in a certain way he did it, because he created you as a being who can achieve the possibility of creating something from nothing. And in that sense, you become like God. And that's what Olam Haba. Olam Haba is the situation that you will what? You will create for yourself to exist eternally, where you will be a mini-God. So Olam Haba is not a place of reward. This has nothing to do with reward. This has to do with creating a certain quality that you now possess, which makes you a mini-God. So I believe that this answers the question. You're not earning anything, and God is only giving you something. He is not requesting anything from you, but he's saying the only way that you can develop joy through your being, by creating something that did not exist before, is by following my commandments of the truth, that I am God without an outside, and that therefore you are part of me. But you make the choice between these two options. So we realize what Olam Haba is, and why Olam Haba is something which is absolutely incredible. Because this is the sin. In Olam Hazeh, the physical universe, while we are alive, you don't realize it. Right now, you are the most powerful thing that was ever made. Nothing has what you have. Nothing has the quality or the ability to create something from nothing. That's right. Everything else God created. The only thing that God did not create is the choice that you make. You created it. So therefore, in the physical universe, people put down the physical universe. And this is something very deep. Because the Mishnah in Haba says that your presence in the physical universe is unlike your presence in the future universe. And your presence in the future universe, the eternal universe, called Olam Haba, is nothing like your presence in the physical universe. And what does it mean? It means that in each situation, the physical world or the eternal world, they all possess a unique quality that they alone possess, which is not shared with the position in the other universe. While you are physical, you have a certain power of becoming God. That's right. In that, you have the ability to become a mini-God. And David HaMelech says this, that man is slightly less than God. Well, how could he say that? Because when he is in the physical form, he has the power of creation. He has the power of creating himself by determining the direction of his consciousness. And therefore, he becomes a mini-God. But he can only do this in the physical universe, because the physical universe, in contrast to the spirit universe, is another option. You have two options which are created in the physical universe. And that's why God created the physical universe, to give you an option of the itself, to give you the option of self-awareness. So therefore, since you are in the physical universe and you are also spiritual, because you are a combination of a soul and a body, the body being what? The option where you are outside of God and your self-awareness makes you a me-you concept, or the spiritual aspect of you where you are inside of God. And that option only appears in the physical universe because of the duality of physical and spiritual in the physical universe. But while you're in that state of duality, you have the option to make a choice. And you directly create your choice from scratch. And therefore, you create something which didn't exist before. But you can only do that in the physical universe where the option exists. But in the other universe called Olam Haba, in the other situation called Olam Haba, the eternal world, you don't have that option anymore. That's right. You cannot create the direction of your consciousness then. It's done. Whatever you created has already been done. But there's something which exists in that situation which does not exist in what? In the physical universe. Because in Olam Haba, you have become a mini-God. That's right. In Olam Hazeh, the physical universe, you have the power to become like God. But in the eternal universe, which is called Olam Haba, you actually, in a certain sense, develop the actual situation where you become a mini-God. Not God, of course. Chas v'shalom. This is totally untrue. And this is where Judaism differs from, let's say, Hinduism, where in Hinduism, they believe that man, the soul of man, is God. And of course, that's totally wrong. But the soul of man is like God. And that's what you create from nothing. So the physical universe gives you the option to create. And that's called becoming. The spirit universe gives you the possibility of becoming God itself. Becoming a mini-God. So that you will have created something from nothing, the itself, which never existed before as a truth. So each universe that you're in, the physical universe or the spirit universe, each universe provides a specific talent which never existed before. One provides the physical, the concept of becoming, what? Becoming God, becoming a mini-God. And the other one gives you the reality of being a mini-God. That's right. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at the production of the divine nature where you replicate who God is. And this is absolutely astounding. So now we understand something we never understood before. And what is that? And that's the greatest problem. Because this is the one thing that makes all people apikosim, atheists, people who don't believe that God exists. What is the main reason that people deny the existence of God? They see what God created and they understand that it is absolutely astounding. When a woman is pregnant and suddenly a child comes out and they say to the woman, "What is this? How did you make this?" The woman says, "I have no idea. My body made it. It had nothing to do with me." And that is God. It's not your body which created her. It is God who created this baby through your body. But it's God who does it. And when you see the complexity of what a person is, you know that there is a God. Because the essence of the divine activity is the concept of design. Everything that God created has an incredible design, has an incredible design. God is known by the depth of his wisdom, the depth of his creation, that it follows precise and exact laws. Who does that? Who controls the design? Who made the design? God. And it's only possible. Design follows an intellect, the intellect of God himself. So if anyone tells you that there is no God, He doesn't know what he's talking about. Let him look at a pregnant woman when she has her child, and let him answer the question, who made this incredible being? And the answer is God. There's no one else. But if this is true, why don't people believe in God? Or how could people believe in absolutely absurd conclusions about God? Because fundamentally, people see a certain cruelty for God, and they don't understand what God is doing. They understand who he is because they see his creation, but they don't understand how he acts. Why does God bring intense suffering on mankind? You have any idea of the pain that has been experienced by mankind throughout human history? It's absolutely astounding. So why does God do this? Why does he do this in which seems to be evil? And the answer is, it's not evil. Because the only real way that God can eliminate the sin that you do, where suddenly you cancel out his existence, is by making you totally vulnerable. In other words, when a person thinks that there is no God and the universe came by itself randomly, when a person believes that, of course, this is ridiculous. But why does a person believe that? Because he sees that the events of the world are cruel. They are painful. Where does all this vulnerability come from? So he says, obviously, there is no God, but he's totally wrong. That's God providing the solution to all atheists, to all non-believers. You think that I am cruel, but I am not cruel. Because since the process of the reason why you're in the physical universe is to acquire the direction of consciousness and to understand that I am he, I am everything. And since you deny that, I have to make you vulnerable. Vulnerable. The key word of the physical universe is vulnerability. When you deny my existence, God says, so I have to make you vulnerable, that you are not in charge of yourself at all. You are not in charge of your physical health. You are not in charge of living or dying. You are not in charge of your wealth or your happiness. I am in charge of everything. And therefore, when you start to have problems, you start to have child problems, marriage problems, financial problems, health problems, and so on. When you have problems, you realize suddenly that you are not God. And that's the way I make you realize it. So there's a certain amount of pain which is involved. But why do I have to do this? Because the truth is, I'm trying to make you like me. Well, what does it mean to be a mini-God? It's to develop the option that I am real, that I have no outside, that I am the master and designer of everything in existence. But you will not accept that truth unless you become totally vulnerable after having denied it. I have to do this to change your mind, to push you to choose the right way. Because if you don't push the right way, you cannot go to eternity at all. Because you cannot live in eternity and have a false view of who I am. And you have to understand this, that you are my child and I love you, but I want you to be with me. But the only way you can be with me is if you choose correctly our relationship. If you realize that I have no outside and I am absolute in being. And if you deny this in the physical universe, whether you have the option of the choice, I will force you to change your mind. And how do I do that? By making you vulnerable. So it appears that I'm cruel. It appears that I'm evil, but I am not. I exhibit the amount of vulnerability that you need to correct your choice. And everything I do is with absolute justice. I will not give you 1 ounce of pain in what you don't need. Every ounce of pain that you go through is for me. And it's designed to show you your vulnerability so that suddenly you realize, I am he. I am the one that does everything. I am not human. I am not a force. I am none of these things. I have nothing to do with the physical universe. I am not human. I cannot be human. It's impossible. I am the ultimate source of all existence. And that's what I am. And I'm doing all of this to you to make you vulnerable. So suddenly you realize that I am real and I am true. And I'm trying to save you. Why? Because I love you. That's why. Because you don't understand that of everything that I made in existence, out of the millions of species that I have created, you are the object of everything. Why? Because you are the object, because I've given you self-awareness, something which I alone possess, and which I've given to you as my gift. But that allows you to be free and to choose in terms of what, and choose my direction. And I want you to understand who I am. So I will punish you and create the pain that you need to know that you are vulnerable. And I never give you more pain than you need. Never. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. So suddenly we understand what's really going on. That the purpose that God created was to give you an option, the ability to choose, and to give you the free will to choose, so that you can acquire the quality of independence which only belongs to God. Independence from everything, because God is complete in himself. So therefore there's no contradiction between what happens in the world and the evil that happens in the world and God. There's no contradiction. God is absolutely good because he is only good. Because he does only good. But sometimes you need correction. And the correction that you need is to understand that God is the only reality. There's no other reality. And it's the acceptance of that reality that allows you to create a direction from consciousness where suddenly you create something that never existed before. And God wants you to have that, so that in the Olam, Haba, in the eternal world, you will become a mini God. That's what he has in mind. You have to understand it. The reason why you're physical and in the physical universe, and the reason that explains everything that happens to you in your life, is only because God wants you to be in the eternal world to coexist with him. And that's the only reason what he did. And you have to grasp that. You have to understand that your purpose of being physical and being created physically is to choose, but to choose through your free will. And to choose to what? To choose to direct your consciousness towards the truth that you are part of God. God is not part of you. He is not created from you. He's not outside of you. He is not a human being. He is none of these things, but he wants you to be a mini God so that you can have joy from your being, from what you've created, which is yourself. And this is the whole purpose of existence. So recognize what it is and understand what this vulnerability does. If you make a mistake and you deny God's existence, he will correct you. He will make you vulnerable in life. You suddenly will have problems with children, problems with health, problems with finances, problems with marriage. He will give you problems so that you realize you are not God. So this is the truth. And this year today exemplifies and reiterates what the problem, what exactly God is doing. So I believe I've answered the question. Why did God give us the problem and then have to solve it by making us 2 commandments? No, that's not what he's doing. He's not making us want to deserve to be that. No, because God wants to give us the highest joy possible, which is joy which comes from created being, which you create yourself. And therefore it makes you into a mini God. That's why he gives you free will. That's why he gives you commandments. That's why he says to you, make the choice. You can make the choice. And when you make the choice, you will have created something which never existed before. And bingo, you will be a mini God. That's what I want. And what God says fundamentally, and I will have my way. Because if you deny my existence, if you deny my power, if you deny my purpose, I will make you vulnerable. And then eventually you will learn what that is. Okay. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is great. You've changed it from this question of a negative question, how do we deal with this problem, into a positive thing, like how do you recreate a mini God?
Right.
So my question is, so what do we do with the term Namad Sufa? How do you touch that? Like, it sounds like it's a negative term.
Well, that's a complicated problem. What exactly is the sense of disempowerment which you get when suddenly you're given something that you didn't deserve or you didn't earn? Where does that disempowerment come from? Because it comes from the height of your being. Since you have the capacity to become a mini God, therefore, you realize through your self-awareness that you are not a mini God. It was initially you understand that you are not that which you seem to feel, and that creates a disempowerment, because somehow you feel like you are the basis of reality, that reality comes from you. It comes from your five senses. And since it is the basis of your reality, in a certain way you are like God. But you're not like God because you realize you do not have any power at all. And it's that contradiction between having a certain self-awareness like God, but yet not having any power to correspond to that. It's the contradiction between these two extremes that creates the problem of disempowerment. So God says you can get rid of the disempowerment. How? By becoming a mini God. The way you solve that problem is that if you become like me. But the only way to become like me is to realize that I am God and that you are my son. You cannot become like me because you think you're God. You are not God, but you are my son. You are my creation, my daughter, and therefore you come from me, and that is your greatness. And when you create that concept in your own consciousness, so that I don't do it for you, that will take away your disempowerment or the contradiction between these two things. And that will make you a mini divine, replicated divine being. Okay. So I think you should listen to this lecture more than once. It's very deep. And if you listen to this lecture and truly understand it, you will begin to understand what God is doing and why he's doing it. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for listening.